and trying to see some Aboriginal connections between the Aboriginal connections with the ancient church. So yeah, well, let's jump into this. This is a map I came across about Aboriginal regions, and the problem with it is that there are many different maps about Aboriginal regions, and they don't all agree. I think why I kept this map was because it seemed like it was like they all kind of agreed in these general terms, but it became more divisive as you got more specific as to how like they would say, for example, the air. You don't see that on your screen, right? The air region. Okay, all the different groups within there, have a commonality, even though they're not the same. There's overall the same within that. And this was reflected in this that I found on the internet. It said there are 900 distinct Aboriginal groups across Australia, each distinguished by unique names, usually identifying particular languages, dialects, or distinctive speech and mannerisms. Each language was used for original myths, from which the distinctive words and names of the individual myths derive. With so many distinct Aboriginal groups, languages, beliefs, and practices, scholars cannot attempt to characterize under a single heading the full range and diversity of all myths being variously and continuously told, developed, elaborated, performed, and experienced by group members across the entire continent. Attempts to represent the different groupings in maps have varied widely. The Encyclopedia of Aboriginal Australia nevertheless observes one intriguing feature of Aboriginal Australian mythology is the mixture of diversity and similarity in myths across the entire continent. It's kind of what we expected when we got into this particular continent, is that it would have a lot of diversity among it, but there are some underlying similarities. So I've picked a few different creation and flood stories that I found that supported the point that I was trying to make. I omitted the ones that didn't. So we do have a biased sample here, but nevertheless a sample. And so we'll take a look at this one. So where I found cave art that with the picture with the story, I put that here. A little aside here. I meant to ask this last time. This has nothing to do with the presentation itself, but this TV that we're using, is everybody? Do you guys? Is this okay as opposed to the projector screen that we're using?
Yeah, it's better.
I think it's
Yeah.
Nobody's objecting to it.
No.
All right.
I didn't even realize. Didn't mention it.
It's just super easy for me to use. So anyway,
It's cool.
all right.
It's cool. Isn't it?
Did you just find it in the small room yet?
No, I found it in the front room.
Margaret?
No, Ralph acquired it.
Oh.
It was a gift to him. So, all right, back to the main presentation here. All right, the Aboriginal origin story of one Gina, the creators. Do you want to do this?
I do.
Please.
Thank you. In the beginning, there was only darkness and a bare land. There was no life on earth, no animals, no plants, no trees, and no humans. One Gina, the creators, were cloud and rain spirits who brought the ancestors from within the earth and over the seas, and life began. Some of the ancestors were like men and others were like animals. In fact, the ancestors were able to change shape and become either man or animal.
Put that in the back of your mind there, the shape changing, able to change shapes. So we're gonna come back to that, but just note that we've heard it once already tonight. So this is a creation myth of Bayami. Not much of a story if you ask me, but does anybody want to take a, you want to go for one?
Okay.
All right, have at it.
Bayami was the Sky Father or creator god in the origin mythology for several Aboriginal groups in southeastern Australia. In these creation stories, Bayami arrived from the skies with his emu wife Beriganulu, the goddess of fertility, and they had a son named Duramulum, the shapeshifter.
Point 2 for the shapeshifters. Okay, good finish up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Miami gave the first rules to humans, forbidding them to eat the animals. The gods then spent time with the humans, teaching them and helping them evolve.
We're gonna have other shapes, I think at least one more shapeshifter tonight. I found them really interesting, you know. Where have we encountered them before? Anybody remember any other shape-shifting in our? Harry Potter. No, Ralph, I'm gonna take away 10 points from you for that.
10 points from Gryffindor.
In the word itself, you mean?
Yes, anywhere, and now all these religions that we've talked about, does any shape-shifting ring a bell?
Oh, Carly turns into a real bad sort of dude.
Who does?
Carly.
From which?
Indian, okay.
She changes.
Okay,
One minute she's nice, one minute she's chopping heads off.
but does she change physical shape?
Yeah.
Okay,
Really ugly.
alright,
Would there be any kind of shape-shifting in Greek mythology?
yes,
There is.
that's what I'm thinking,
I'm
because
thinking.
Zeus was a
Zeus
shapeshifter.
was a shapeshifter.
He was a shapeshifter, yeah.
Yeah.
And, yeah, because if you look in the Greek, and I think it was the Indians too, where these gods would change shapes to trick somebody into doing what it is they wanted. So I thought, well, do we have shapeshifters in the Bible? I couldn't find or think of any shapeshifting in the Bible. But anybody familiar with the Book of Enoch?
Yes, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So, you know, the Bible refers to books that don't exist at this day. The Wars of Jehovah, the Book of Jasher, yeah. And some say that the Wars of Jehovah is a book that's contained within the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch, I forget, we found that a couple hundred years ago. Does that sound about right? Do you know? Okay, anyway, it's relatively newish find, if I recall, and it's non-canonical. But in the Book of Enoch,
Wait, what's that?
non-canonical means it's not regarded as part of the canon.
Which is the Bible?
The Bible is a Christian canon. The Quran is canon for Muslims.
Okay, so
Canon is
anybody's.
the
Would it be the Jewish Apocrypha?
Enoch is not part of that.
No, not that one.
But in the Book of Enoch, it says there were 200 fallen angels descended from the heavenly realm onto the summit of Mount Hermon. And they were so smitten by the beauty of human women that they took the form, they changed shapes to look like humans, and that way they could sleep with all women. Because of this sin, a race of half angelic, half human species sprang up. And this is the Nephilim that we get in Genesis that have died.
So, did you know that all these people are hunting for that? They're digging things up there. I still haven't seen a big skull yet. I don't know.
So, I guess we're a little off Australia at this point, but just the idea that there's this shape-shifting thing throughout different cultures, and as with Biami, you know, I mean, the shapeshifter is not from giants, but it's from an emu wife. So that's kind of weird. But
I know what a shapeshifter could be categorized as. It's like werewolf.
yeah.
Shapeshifting, as an example. Yeah.
So as we continue on with Biami, you know, Ralph, you want to finish that one up?
Later, mankind began to kill and eat animals. They were caught and punished by the god. In the ancient Aboriginal tribes, the name of the creator, spelled differently, Baami, is forbidden to be spoken publicly. Women are prohibited from seeing depictions of Baami or to visit sacred sites, which is in many cases are also male initiation sites known as boras.
So the other, I mean, it's kind of an odd creation story, right? It's not very detailed, but the later man began to eat animals. Is anybody familiar with where the Bible allows people to eat animals?
Yes, there's time in Genesis, which is eating flesh, eating animals. There's also things forbidden in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and there's also a book of Acts 10, 15 as well.
Good job, 10 points for you. You can have Ralph's done it. Yeah, it comes in Genesis. It's after the flood. Lord says, everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you can't have meat that has the blood in it. So that comes for all the Jewish ritual around.
Now the Jews are permitted not to eat the blood, but then again, if are we allowed to eat blood in the meat? Like when we cook it, like have blood in it? Yeah, so we are. We're not prohibited from that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so anyway, it's kind of this, again, touching back to, all right, well, Aboriginal has this thing about meat eating, and the Bible has its thing about meat eating.
But this was before Jews were around. I mean, it wasn't the first Jew Abraham, but before that was not classified. So this was given even before there was the first Jew as well. That's an example. Yeah, so that's why I was thinking that whether we should eat blood or not, but I was just wondering that situation. Yeah.
No, it's true. The Rainbow Serpent. Mary, you want to take a go?
There are a number of different iterations. The specific story depends on the climate and culture of the indigenous group telling it. And there are dozens of different names used by the hundreds of distinct languages spoken across the country. The various versions don't all agree whether the snake is male or female or androgynous, but they do all agree that the serpent, providing the font of life water, and is even considered the creator of the universe in some cultures.
So in the Bible, what's the serpent a symbol for?
Evil, bad dude.
Senses.
Oh, the same.
Senses,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, also, yeah, okay, senses.
Yeah. That's right, yeah, that's right. So I thought that was interesting, it's considered the creator of the universe, provides the font of life, provides water, provides truth. Yeah. So is that how we see our five senses? They provide us with the truth.
Materially, yes.
And that they're like the creator of the universe. Is that what we see? Our senses, they give us life in that kind of sense. Without my five senses, I don't have anything.
Well, even just thinking about Helen Keller, and she didn't have hearing and she didn't have sight, and that was huge for her. Imagine not having any senses.
And also, animals like the skunk live by their senses, for example, because they live by their smell, I guess. Yeah.
And you think about in Genesis, what does the serpent say to Eve? He says,
Everybody else is doing it.
for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. You will have life.
Death in Genesis means spiritual death, right? Doesn't mean, because obviously they didn't die physically when that first happened. So it had to mean spiritual death, that they would spiritually die, if that's the case. Yeah.
So I think there's something to this story about how we see life. Laura, you want to do the next bit on the Rainbow Serpent?
The stories share a common thread, a gargantuan snake, same, Snakes slumbered beneath the surface of the earth before emerging from the ground to awaken different groups of animals, forging physical features like hills, gorges, rivers, and lakes into the once featureless terrain. The rainbow serpent slithered all over the country, occupying water holes, providing nourishing water, and forming geographical features en route.
So,
Snake.
yeah. So it's, yeah, I find it interesting, and I also find it hard to kind of connect some of the biblical correspondence to it, but, you know, you squint, you kind of
Mhm.
make some things tie in. But even if I have to squint at these two things, doesn't mean others do. Your esteemed former pastor, Reverend Eric E., wrote an article on the Rainbow Serpent, found it in New Church Life from the 80s, I think it was, 70s, anyway, a while ago. And this paragraph I'm going to give you now summarizes his interpretation of the Rainbow Serpent. You can feel free to disagree if you wish, or you can tell him how great he is. Your choice. You want to read one, Patricia? Or?
It's easy to read this than on the other thing.
Okay.
I believe the Aboriginal myth stemming from Dreamtime is a compacted version of both the story of Eden and of the flood. The time from the serpent, Genesis 3, to the rainbow, Genesis 7, in the biblical narrative is complicated or compacted or condensed into a simultaneous view of both stories in one beast. Mine missing bits?
No, that's it.
Namely the rainbow serpent. The one beast collects the extremities of the two stories, the beginning, serpent, and the end, flood, rainbow.
Take that as you wish. I don't know. Thoughts?
Well, I say that it was a rainbow serpent, yeah. Like in the word. Rainbow, never flooded the ground again.
Mm-hmm.
According to the Bible, the rainbow, there wasn't a rainbow until flood.
Yeah.
It was a new deal.
But you know, the serpent makes the water, right? He gives you the water. This is everything rolled into one. I mean, and look, it's one of the difficult things I think with reading a lot of these ancient sacred texts is that you're reading it and it's the culture's impression of how God works, not necessarily actually how God works. I mean, we see that with the Bible. You know, God said, kill all these people. Well, does God really say these things? No, but that's how they think it is. So God punished us. Well, did God really punish them? No. So the same thing with this, you know, rainbow serpent is trying to grasp that this is a tool that they are using to explain how God works. So he gives us life through our senses and water and truth. And also there's this rainbow, this covenant to promise not to destroy us. You know, that's not explicitly stated, but maybe that's just how they see God, you know, how God operates. It's not about necessarily the story of the Adam and Eve and Noah combined, but this is just how they see God operating. And perhaps the symbolism is similar, but you know, who knows? Maybe it isn't. All right, on to the next. Now this is a flood story. It's told by Albert Baranga. Owen, do you want to have a crack at one, or are you able to read it?
I'll have a go.
All right.
In ancient times, the sea made the watermarks on the mountains and ranges. For example, Mount House, Mount Waterloo, Mount Han, all have these watermarks. They are right on top. The reason for this flood was men killed the old woman's third son, the one she loved.
How many children did Adam and Eve have?
Mhm.
Three.
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 Oh, they actually.
Cain and Abel, and then they had Seth afterwards.
Oh.
And when the flood comes, what's the one son that survives? The third. It's his lineage that survives. You know, Seth's long gone by that point, but you know, you can imagine that Eve might love the third son. Men, what were they doing? Were they killing off Seth's lineage? Was that what the Nephilim were doing? I don't know. Cliff?
This old lady went down and speared the eye of the sea. It is said that she was staying on Nauru Island. The son was dear to her. They told her. They've killed him. Already they have taken his life, they told her. Ah, she said. She wept once and did not weep again. I'll finish then, she said. She went over to a place called Garajin, and there she speared and poked a small hole in the sea. The sea went back and back exceedingly, sucked it right out. The place was left hard and dry, and the fish were flapping about on the land, on the hard bottom place, for there was no water. At that time, the mountains were made.
It reminds me of the Red Sea parting.
Huh? Yeah, right. Yeah, dry land.
Dry land is all from dry land.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The so I was thinking about it in terms of the Noah's Ark story. So if you have fish, you know, what are fish? Well, they're facts. So low level truths, they're facts. And well, there's no water, so there's no truth. And so what happens when you have no real truth, even your knowledge of the world dies off and perishes. They're facts. They're useless. Anyway, that was my hit at it. The writings talk about the Noah's Ark story in terms of suffocation, right? People are wiped out, they're suffocated. They have no truth. So something similar going on here. We say the present tides don't rise like this. The sea traveled across like a range to them. The mountains sank beneath it. Then she finished them. They were drowned. While still there was no water, that is at a time when it disappeared, she picked up a turtle and fish and took them up to the top of the hill at Naulu. The place is called Naulu. It's an island. That place she climbed up to. Here she remained and dug for water right on the top. Then that one, the sea, was traveling and all the mainland was underneath it. All right, so mountains ruling loves. She takes the turtle and the fish. What's she doing? She's elevating them. So she's taking these facts, elevating them, and looking for truth at the highest point. So it's like she's trying to reanimate things through finding God's truth again. Last one.
That was the time it went back. That time it finished them. It drowned all those men. Only those who climbed right up on top over there, only those may be living. Then they returned this way. That was the sea that drowned all the men of that generation on the earth. Then that time they made themselves into turtle and fish, and now those of that generation are living creatures in the sea. They were people first, but they made themselves sea creatures. The sea drowned them all.
Shape shifting again. That's at least our third time.
So yeah, that's very similar to the first story.
Was Medusa in the Greek mythology a shapeshifter? No,
I don't think so.
not think so. That's the thinking of that.
So yeah, we're starting to see some similarities between this and Noah's Ark. So here are some clear connections within the story, right? The flood was a judgment upon the evil. Flood covered the mountains. Land was covered, only a few were spared, and everybody else was drowned. Now, I made some comments about fish, but Ben, why don't you read? This is about the correspondence of fish. Can you read this one?
In the word fish means facts that spring from sensory evidence, for there are three types of facts: intellectual, rational, and sensory. All are implanted in the memory, or rather in the memories, and in someone who is regenerate, are summoned from there by the Lord by way of the internal man. These facts, which come from sensory evidence, enter a person's consciousness or perception during his earthly life, for they are the basis of his thinking.
Thank you, sir. So, right, so they made themselves into turtle and fish, right? So are people shape-shifting as well in this thing?
I think so.
And what are they turning themselves into? Well, they're turning themselves into people who, care about sensory evidence. Now, I said there aren't any shapeshifters in the Bible, but is that actually true? Are there shapeshifters in the Bible? Are people turning themselves into fish in the Bible? Well,
That's a great story.
so let me tell you,
Balaam, yeah.
let me turn your attention to the book of Habakkuk, if I may. You will make man like the fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no lure. So, I mean, they're not actually turned to fish, but you will make them like the fish of the sea when something happens. So, I mean, there's kind of this push that maybe, in the Bible, people turn to fish too.
Jesus says, I'll make you fishers of men. Exactly.
They're not turning people into fish, though.
Oh, no.
Fishers of men. You're gonna be a fisherman.
A fisherman, yeah.
A little bit different than being a fish. Did you go out fishing? Yes. Am I a fish? No.
You'd say that a person that's a materialist, a humanist that follows the doctrine of communism would be that there, wouldn't it? Well, it's only the five senses, that's it, nothing else.
Making a man like fish of the sea.
So that's it. So
Making independent
you all remember that. So a materialist is actually corresponds to a fish.
They're very tasty, right?
Yeah.
Barbecued up.
No, that's really good.
Regenerate those things.
All right.
Oh, yeah,
Regeneration. Shape-shifting. I like
Change
that.
us into angels. There.
Well, spiritual shapes shifting, go from a bad person to a good person. I don't know.
Oh, there's shape shifting going on in the next life as well.
Yeah.
For
all right.
example,
I gotta keep moving. So let's go to the next flood story. Ralph, I think you're up.
The Mandava flood story. Long, long ago, there was a great flood. It originated from the fact of some children who found the winking owl in a tree and plucked out all its feathers. Naughty kids. They forced a grass reed through its nose and treated the bird most shamefully. The bird flew without wings into the heavens and showed himself to the Gawanga, the great father. The Gawanda, whatever, became very angry and decided to drown the people.
Wow. All right.
Later, the people saw a small cloud rising, which grew bigger and bigger, till it spread all over the sky. The thunder began to roll and crash, and the people were greatly afraid. With the rain and thunder was a terrible wind, which broke great limbs off trees and rooted up others. During this terrible storm, there was a noise above the awful crashes of thunder. The noise was coming from the north. The salt water, the sea, came pouring over the ranges from the north. The flood rose higher and higher till all the land was covered, except to the tops of 2 or 3 mountains.
You've heard this story before, haven't you? So what I find interesting here is trees, all right? So trees are rooted up and destroyed. And one of the features of the Noah's Ark flood is, in the internal sense, it's about people losing their perception, right? They no longer could perceive God in heaven. They had to be reformed through the word. Well, what do trees correspond to? Perception. That's right. You're exactly right. Thanks for saying that. Yes, perception. So, well, look at that. We lose perception in both stories via trees disappearing.
There's also shapeshifting as far as it's not turning into fish, but it's actually seeing trees walking and talking, walking trees in the man born blind. Man born blind.
Get out of here. Get out of here. So the noise coming from the north, it says, the writings say the north would be noise from the north is a dark state, a state of falsity. You do not, it's an obscure state as regard to the truth. So that makes sense, right? Noise from the north, losing perception, you're losing, contact with the truth. Saltwater seas, that just creates death, right? So, well, that, and then finish, Lori, the story.
From further west, a man and his wives with a dog were battling their way in a canoe when a bird with a leaf in its mouth flew in front of them, showing them the way to Mount Broom. They eventually reached Mount Broom and landed there where some other survivors were. Then Jabalgari, the great left-handed man, incised his little finger and let the blood trickle down into the floodwaters. The waters began to go down and eventually disappeared off the country. All other people were drowned.
Nice, huh? I looked up in concordance, what does left-handed mean?
Oh.
You know what the entry says? See, right-handed. Well, that's not very helpful.
Well, in Italian, when they say left hand, they say sinister. Sinister.
Well, and see, that makes sense because if you can think of in the book of Judges, there's the left-handed guy who kills King Eglon, right? They say, "Oh, show us your cloak," and he says, "Oh yeah, here it is," or yeah, here it is, and it's the left hand that has the sword concealed, and he goes in and kills the king because he's a sinister. Yeah.
So what's the correspondence of left again? Left.
I didn't tell you what its correspondence was.
Yeah, not yet.
So let's take a look at some similarities to the Genesis story. Flood was sent to judge the wickedness. We got that. God sent a flood to drown all the people. Yep. Began to rain. All the land was covered. A man and his wife in a boat with an animal. A bird with a leaf in its mouth was a sign of dry land. They landed on a mountain. Everybody else drowned. And there's a sacrifice of blood at the end of the flood. I think there's something that's left-handedness, and I really couldn't find anything that's from the writings that we got into it. But I think about how the God puts blood in the water, and blood is divine truth. So it's like, changing the water back to truth, something like that. I don't know. But I thought I would show you that spiritual seas. Patricia, do you want to? You can read it.
I was conducted through certain dwelling places of the first heaven, and from there I was allowed to see in the distance a vast sea, heaving with large waves, stretching far out of sight. I was told that those on earth who have wished to be great, not caring at all whether they used fair means or foul, so long as they gather glory to themselves, have fantasies such as this, and see a sea such as that in which they are afraid of being drowned.
So I was thinking about this while I'm thinking of these stories about floods. You have seas where it's heaving large waves, and what do we think about, in the Bible, who's being drowned? Nephilim. What's their basic sin? They think they're great. They want to overthrow God, right? The Tower of Babel and all that. So this probably ties in very cleanly with that. And so what's the connection to this story? Is it that people thought they were so great plucking the feathers off that owl. We can do what we want with this owl. Yeah, they were gathering glory for themselves by tormenting the owl. They didn't care whether they used fair means or foul.
Mhm.
No pun intended.
Mhm. Too late.
So yeah, I mentioned this already about the blood and using divine truth. Left-handed. This is the only I could find about it. So this left hand are those who are in the good from understanding. But that's not necessarily about left-handedness, but it's only I could find about that reference things at the left. So I don't know. I tend more towards Cliff's sinister interpretation of left-handed. I think that fits the story better than that these are people about the understanding of the left-handed God. So
Well, so it's the good interpretation and the bad interpretation.
yeah, well, what's the bad interpretation of being the left-handed God? I mean,
No, well, I mean, like, it could be good and evil, or it could be love and truth.
yeah. Yeah, I know. It just doesn't feel very satisfying. But that's not the only things we have in the story. We have our main creature, owls. So some children found the winking owl in a tree and plucked out all its feathers, right? That was the opening slide. And there is something in the writings about what owls correspond to. Any guesses?
It hasn't got owls haven't got a very good name in the writings, have they?
No.
Am I right?
Yeah, nocturnal. That's not really not a really good thing.
Yeah.
So the short version of it is underlined here. Gross and dense falsities are described by owls and ravens. Why owls? Because they live in the darkness of the night. So you can see the quote from Isaiah that the owl and the raven shall dwell within. So as you say, Cliff, they don't have a good correspondence. So think about this flood story though, right? They're plucking the feathers of the owl. And that's how this whole thing starts. So what are they trying to tell us there correspondentially? They're plucking the feathers off of gross and dense falsities.
Or feathers.
Well, they go on the skin.
What they correspond to, so they're.
I didn't look up that. I didn't think of that one. Yeah, I don't know. Well, here's what I did find. Oh, you want to read this one?
The thorn shall come up in the palaces, the thistle and bramble her fortresses, that she may be habitation of dragons, a court for the daughters of the owl. Wow.
Interesting.
We get some good stuff from the prophets, don't we?
What?
Court for the daughters of the owl. So like this passage, I tried to break it down over here for you. And it basically says the dogmas which they are defended by which they're defended are signified by the falsities and evils in which these are the devastation of all good and truth. Owls meaning those who see falsities as truths. All right, so owls meaning those who see falsities as truths. So again, trying to connect this back to that flood story, and all right, plucking those feathers off. Why is that a bad thing if the owl is bad, right? Well,
And my
So-
children.
yeah. So okay, so all right, follow this lead here. The daughters of the owl. What are the daughters of the owl? Let's go a little bit more into that. Cliff, you want to read the left side there?
For this I will lament and howl, is it?
Howl.
And howl. I will go stripped and naked. I will make a lamentation like dragons and a mourning like the daughters of the owl. That's from this treats of the devastation of Samaria, which signifies the spiritual church in respect to doctrine. Here that church devastated.
So on this side, we see lamentation over devastated truth by making a mourning like the daughters of the owl. So, devastated truth is, devastated truth, it's like you've taken all the information out of it. It's been reduced to nothing. If you just keep, perverting it and twisting it, you go, all right, well, thou shalt not murder. Oh, well, that doesn't apply in certain situations.
Right.
And then you go, okay, so you have this new understanding of what that means. And then, some years later, well, we think thou shalt murder means this, but actually you twist it a little bit again. And it's lost some more meaning. And every time you twist it, it becomes devastated and there's nothing left. So the daughters of the owl, it's devastated truth. So I'm going, is that plucking of the feathers, while it's seeing that story as a problem, is the real problem, that God comes in contact with this owl, this devastated truth, God gave truth and it's been plucked and twisted and distorted. That's the image we have here, right? Plucking the feathers, it's being devastated, it's being reduced into yuck, putting a string through its nose, they've abused it. And this is somehow a picture of what's going on, and God's angry because the truth has been devastated. That's the best I can do. But there's something going on with that owl. All right. We got last flood story. Go through this one.
The Bandava flood story. Long, long ago, there was a great flood. It originated from the fact of some children who found the winking owl in a tree and plucked out all its feathers. They forced a grass reed through its nose and treated the bird most shamefully. The bird flew without wings into the heavens and showed himself to Ngongu, the great father. Ngongu became very angry and decided to drown the people. Is that not the same story that we just
drowned. You read the one before, I think. Very small.
It's
It's a
different
Okay.
tribe.
Yeah. Like,
It's the express version of it.
Huh.
Same thing, and probably gets angry with drunk people.
Mhm.
yeah.
So, in the Africa one, we looked at how a lot of the authors are trying to prove that these stories didn't come from the Bible. They were indigenous to those areas. And I kind of wonder if there's somebody going around trying to date these stories back far enough to say, nope, this did not come from the Christians. I haven't seen it, but
What about the Gilgamesh epic? You heard of that one?
that was like last year, man. That was from class number 3 in this series of 15.
Gilgamesh.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that was another mythological flood story as well. Yeah.
for sure. That was a good one too.
Yeah.
So anyway, just showing you that this flood story exists around. So we're gonna start heading down the home stretch here. Little different monsters. There's a lot of monsters in Aboriginal legends and myths. Are you a crowd for the return?
Oh, man, yeah, that was-
Can you read this one?
A bit me?
Yep.
Yeah. These ancient, malevolent Nagaya Nangoku cannibal beings have sharp, pointy teeth and curved, claw-like fingernails. They reside beneath a salt lake, permanently late disappointment. In these environments, they have been known to stalk and to feast on human prey, to be precise, Matu people.
Alright. These guys, the Pang-Karlangu Walpiri people, have a similar story. Ralph, you want to maybe chop it up and maybe Murray can split this one?
These people, which extends far across the central and western deserts, usually wears a woven hairstring belt around his middle. This accoutrement is closely connected to his foul purposes. And what's his name? Huge, lumbering, bestial humanoids roam the desert in search of their desired quarry. In their spare time, they fight one another. Lost human babies or infants who've crawled or wandered away from the main camp. What's his name? Preferred food source being juicy, tender, and easy to catch.
They.
They grab their prey by their little legs, upending them quickly, head down, tiny arms akimbo.
Oh. So it's not no dingo eating the baby.
Yes.
After slaying his defenseless victim, Lengu will string its little body around his waist, tying its legs into his hairstring belt so that its head dangles and bobs up and down as he strides along. Lengu will continue his roving quest for more chubby little babies, moves straight from the care of adults, and goes on catching them until his hairstring belt is full and he's completely circled by lifeless dangling babies.
Oh.
Then the Pangu makes a fire, chucking the dead tots onto the ashes, after which he settles down to gorge himself on a mouth-watering meat of slow roasted baby.
I have nightmares.
Murray's not gonna let the read his grandkids stories at night anymore.
Is it still ours?
Fire.
What?
Are we still on ours?
No, these are part Pang-Karlangu, which is this guy here, and he's
Collection of
a
dead babies.
yeah, he finds babies tasty. And just to make sure we're clear on this, these guys, these ones are different than the Pang-Karlangu. So multiple Aborigines have this basic idea of a predator out there that likes to eat children. Which, I tell you what, I wish we had one of those stories.
Oh, come on.
So the interesting part was that the common understanding of this is it's a myth used for social control. Parents tell their kids this so they don't go wandering off.
Exactly.
So, you can see where that makes sense, right? Don't go wandering off, kiddo. There's a monster out there that can eat you. Yeah. Oh, boy. Some slow roast you if you don't stay near my mom and dad.
Believe me, Todd, there are people ready to probably do that anyway in modern times, some of these statements.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm not coming.
I don't want to know yet.
Okay, well, anyway.
And I was trying to think, is there any biblical cannibals, right? And I thought first of Baal worship.
Oh, sure.
You can sacrifice your children in the ravines and the overhanging crags. Those offering human sacrifice, kiss calves. So it's there, but it's not really quite the same.
Not cannibals.
Yeah, sacrifice human beings means to destroy wisdom. So it's not quite the same.
Yes.
Right. And the more I thought about it, it's like, this is later in the Bible. Baal worship isn't really where it's at. It's about earlier, right? Our babies, most ancient church symbols. So when the ancient Aboriginal story is telling this, they're talking about the destruction of innocence. And there are these monsters out there, these race of giants that are destroying your innocence.
I get that.
Right. And then I thought, you know what, this is really more about the Nephilim we've talked about already. You know, the Nephilim, it says in Arcana, those who persuaded of their own prominence and superiority treated everything holy and true as being worthless. Right? What are babies? You know, something kind of holy and sacred, treated as worthless. They immersed matters of doctrine in their own evil desires. Persuasion concerning self and its own delusions also grows as more and more things enter in, till at length that persuasion is inerasable. And when doctrinal matters concerning faith are added as well, utterly persuasive assumptions cause them to treat everything holy and true as being worthless, and they become Nephilim, shape-shifting, right? Spirits are so choked to death by them that they do not know how to think, and as a result, feel semi-dead. So Swedenborg goes into a great deal of talk about the Nephilim in that a big part of the Lord's advent in this world was to fight against the Nephilim in the spiritual world and stuff them back in their holes and stuff, because just the smell of them was so
repulsive.
yeah, that you know, people would suffocate spiritually just being around these things. So originally I thought I was going to say the end and end on monsters, but I thought, I can't beat on baby eating monsters. That's not how we end the series. As much as John Talbot wanted me to. That's how I wanted to finish. but I won't do it, John. So I thought spend a couple minutes on takeaways from this is the 15th class we've done covering, you know, so much. And so it's like, well, what are some of our things? So this is kind of where some thoughts I gathered together for my own self. The ancient church was everywhere, right? That's kind of the fundamental piece of this series, is the ancient church was everywhere. And I thought, the new church will be everywhere. But maybe not. You know, maybe not. Well, like, think about it.
I think it's gonna be global, isn't it? It's gonna be a global kind of thing happening, because I mean, it's happening currently. I think at the moment it's a slow, gradual process. It's probably going to spread.
But is it ever going to be everywhere? Think about it in terms of, all right, the ancient church. Does it still exist in this world? Yeah,
it does,
doesn't it? I mean, don't some of these ancient religions that we've talked about still exist to some extent?
But I think Howard was mentioning that that before a new church begins, the old mechanism, not the old religions of what's happening with us, but the mechanism that links us to them is going to have to be before the new church begins to happen as well.
Okay. Well, the Jewish church.
It's still around. Still exists. It says Christian church.
The first Christian church still around. So I kind of was questioning myself. Well, will the new church be everywhere? I've generally taken the idea that it would be everywhere, but I'm kind of going, well, maybe not.
Well, my mom told me it would be.
Oh, well, so she agrees with Howard. I don't know that I agree with her. You know, number two, you know, the various ancient churches were different and yet similar, right? We see all the different mythology and yet the same basic ideas of flood stories and creation stories, and a lot of the details are similar across the different churches. So maybe you wonder, well, will the new church manifest in different ways? If you recall from a couple of weeks ago, we did the Africa class, there was the comment about new revelations still happening in Central Africa. Are there new revelations? You know, Wayne Kasmark at Roseville gave me this book about this woman who says God came to visit her and had her commissioned her to make this painting of him.
Then the heart, no, the heart.
Wayne,
yeah, but it should be a picture of the woman that drew a picture of Jesus.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking
That's the one. Show me
about. I
too.
returned it to him yesterday.
Yeah.
So he was showing it to you later, but so just go, well, you know, is the new church manifesting in other ways? I don't think that book was an example of that, really. But I don't know. But last one you see there about the ancient church, you know, using the dates that we started with we're roughing it out at existing between around the year 10,000 to around 2000 BC. That's a run of 8,000 years. That's a pretty good
Wow.
stretch of time, right? And it's, if you get into Arcana, it will tell you that the ancient church didn't really end until the birth of the Lord. That there were various ancient churches, and they didn't all end at the same time. Some of them were the equivalent of Sodom and Gomorrah, some were the equivalent of the advent of the wise men coming in. They were ancient church people. So, you know, the new church, you know, I know we get frustrated about church growth, and you can count me among those who finds it annoying and frustrating.
But the Jewish church is supposed to have well, before the dawn of the Christian church happened, before actually at the death of Jesus, and the resurrection was when the Christian church began, wasn't it? But the ancient church was before that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that the ancient church has multiple endings, so there's overlap between the two.
Yeah.
Just as we are seeing overlap between the new church and the old Christian church, right? They still exist.
I still do,
You know?
yeah.
And so do we. So, you know, I hate giving a takeaway of be patient, because I feel like that's the kind of the answer all the time. Good and truth, be patient, you know, trust the Lord, you know, it's all kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, but it is such a fundamental piece there, right? You know, be patient, and
Peace holds within itself, trust in the Lord.
so I thought I'd actually leave you with this story. So this series originated, or the idea originated from a Prescott Rogers series. And as this thing has progressed, I've left a lot of Prescott's stuff behind for other things that I found that were more interesting. But I still listen to each one of his audio talks to see if I can grab something out there that was interesting. And near the end, he had this section called illustrations, and it was something to the effect of that there's still some of this ancient church stuff happening out there to this day. Now, this talk was done 92-ish, so it's, you know, it's 30 years old by now. But yeah, no. But he says he found this story newspaper about I think it was a soccer game that was played in Kenya. And apparently it was found out after the game that one of the teams had dug up a hole on the opposing team's goal area and put some magic idols underneath it to prevent the team from scoring on them. And so somebody
tried games at halftime, right?
So apparently I didn't do that, but this caused quite the uproar, and that the official league sanctioning body said this is no good, and that the game must be replayed without sorcery, without the use of sorcery. So I was like, well, you know, we've been talking about the ancient church throughout the world, and you know, about how, you know, it's ended and it's over, and yet we still see remnants of it. We don't normally see remnants of it quite like that, but I thought that would be a nice, fun little story to end with. That you're in Kenya, at least 30 years ago, you better be careful with the sorcery you use, because they'll get you. That game will be replayed without the use of sorcery. So who knows what happened
They
there.
didn't send him to jail or anything. I thought they'd just be disqualified.
So there you have it. 465 slides worth of a presentation. I don't think I've ever had a PowerPoint that long.
Yeah, right.
The old computer did not like working with that presentation. So there you have it. Sorry, I can't hear you, John.
Another 30 years, somebody